collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we discuss at length with the chairman of the House of Representatives Human Rights Committee the appalling conditions at the Kofinou Reception Centre for asylum seekers.
This is not adequate that we have left it for so long. I believe that Cyprus should have a reception centre that should be something that we should be proud of. This was definitely not something that we should be proud of, but there is a huge effort happening at the moment within the Ministry of Interior.
And we look at the pros and cons of Cyprus' somewhat controversial Citizenship for Investment scheme, which is changing the skyline across the island and has a downside for local buyers.
It raises prices, it raises the price of land and of houses and apartments, and making it very difficult for locals to afford housing in Cyprus. So that's a problem for the future.
We're reverting yet again on the programme to the issue of the Kofinou Reception Centre for asylum seekers. And it's received a lot of adverse publicity in foreign press recently, something that so far doesn't seem to have concerned too many of the Cypriot authorities. However, a group of MPs went to visit the site very recently, and among them was Stella Kyriakidis, who has been there before. Stella, you went last year with a group of MPs. You've repeated the visit now. Was there any difference?
Well, first of all, I would say that the Cypriot authorities are concerned. I think it wouldn't be true to say that they haven't been concerned. The situations at the Kofinou Reception Centre has been the source of serious concern for many of us for the past few years. It's not something that has developed now. Unfortunately, with the growing number of asylum seekers hosted there, the problems have become even greater. We went last June when we found that the situation there was, I would say, extremely worrying, and we went again on a visit last week. One of the many problems that we have seen is the increase in the number. This was meant to be a temporary centre hosting 80 unaccompanied single men, and it now hosts 250 or 60 men, families and single women. So it is becoming obvious that this one reception centre cannot cope with the growing problems as other countries have, with the growing problems of the number of asylum seekers.
But however, we have to be very honest here. You said it had been going on for a number of years. There have been several hundred people in there for several years, and the problem with...
The numbers have been going up. The problems... I think we can say that there are three levels. The one is the administrative level, that there was, I think, insufficient supervision, and administration was not looking at all the problems on a daily basis. There was a lot of exchange of letters every time something needed to be done or to be replaced, and this was taking a very long time. The centre itself, the setup of the centre itself is totally inadequate to host so many people. And this has become very clear, so that there were problems with the plumbing, there were problems with the sewage, there are problems with the kitchen facilities, which we had seen when we were there in June.
But nothing has changed in those facilities, has it? That's my problem.
What has changed, I will not say to you that the situation is much improved to what it was in June. I am disappointed to say that not much has happened.
All right, but let's take something very basic. Just a minute, Stella, sorry. Apart from the infrastructure problems, okay, let's take something as very basic as the cleaning. Now, somebody is getting paid to clean those premises, and as far as I'm aware, some of the people who are in the camp have asked in the past for cleaning materials so they can clean it.
No, they have their own cleaning materials. I've been to similar centres in other countries and in Greece, and a lot of the cleaning is often done by the people actually living there. So we don't want people there to feel that, and also their cooking facilities. There's some Some of the families there cook on their own because they have facilities in their own kind of living quarters. But there are common facilities, which when we saw in June were totally destroyed. Very old, broken,
mouldy.
And mouldy. These have now started to be replaced. We saw this. So I will go back to what I was saying.
You say they've started to be replaced. How long does it take to replace a kitchen?
Let me go back. The last 3 weeks, there has been a major shift in the way that this centre is going to be organised and run. And I think that this is what we need to look at. We are definitely, as a human rights committee, not pleased, to say the least, with what has been happening. But there has been a major shift. There has been a political decision that the centre will now have someone from the permanent staff of the Ministry of Interior there, stationed on a daily basis. With him will be a team of people who will be support network of plumbers, electricians, and everything. They will be permanently there so that everything that needs to be fixed will be fixed without all this exchange of letters and paper pushing. There are contractors in at the moment who have started to rebuild the whole infrastructure to make sure that this is not just something that's
not a sticking plaster on a big
It's
wound.
going to go through the ministerial committee in the next 2 weeks. The whole restructuring of the Kofinou Asylum Centre so that it becomes a centre that we can all be proud of and not something that we feel ashamed of and is not representative of what we should be providing in Cyprus.
All right, let me ask you this. Since we know that there are far too many people in there for the infrastructure that's in place, why don't we use some of the now empty military camps which have the infrastructure?
There's two things that were discussed when we were there. The first is the decision that there will probably need to be a second reception centre built or arranged or organised. This is one. So this is part of the proposal that's now going to the Ministerial Committee, the thought of that. And the second thing is that there is a huge problem with the processing of the papers. This was meant to be a temporary centre. People meant to come in, stay for 6 months, their application as an asylum seeker to be processed. If it's approved, they leave there. If it's not approved, they go back. It's taking much, much longer. So this is becoming a centre where people stay more permanently. And this is not acceptable. Additionally, the financial assistance they're given if they leave is not sufficient to allow them to have a respectable standard of living when they're living in the community. We want the people who are in our country as asylum seekers to have their dignity, to be able to be integrated into the community. We do not want them stuck in a reception centre. So all this needs to be relooked at. And I have spoken with the Minister of Interior, Mr. Petridis, who hasn't been there for very long. And it has been decided that there's going to be a total policy shift with this. Putting that aside, we are extremely concerned that there is no nursing facilities there on a daily basis, which there should be. We're extremely concerned that we don't have a doctor visiting at least 2 or 3 times a week for so many people, which there should be. There is no social worker placed there. A lot of these people have come extremely traumatized from many countries where there is war, and they need to have social support. If there is not the ability to send a social worker from the state services, then there are European programs that can be funded to send someone there from a European program.
Well, I think in December we signed an agreement with ESO, and they said they would put 6 or 7 people in there.
All this is now being re-looked at, and because I'm not a believer of let's look into the future and see what happens, it's going to be rediscussed again in Parliament on the 12th of March. Everybody will be coming here, all the services, and we're going to ask for time frames to be put in for every single step of the way. We're going to be going back in June, and I personally, as chair of the committee here, but also as an ex-president of PACE, where we deal with human rights, it may not have been able to change it totally to 180 degrees, but I want to see significant improvements to make sure that we're on the right track.
Okay, you mentioned about people leaving and the dignity with which they can enter the community.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up, because not only is the money that they're given for rent usually insufficient, if they get food vouchers, those very often I know arrive at the end of the month. I've got friends who've actually bought food for families with young children because they haven't got anything to eat.
Yes.
That's got to change.
Yes, this all has to be readdressed and changed. I don't disagree with anything that you have said, but I would also like to say that we heard some positive things. All the children who are at the reception centre are integrated into the local schools, nursery school, primary school and high school with no problems, fully integrated. This is not something I saw when I was at similar reception centres in Greece, when on the islands the children there aren't attending school at all because they cannot, they're not being integrated. So there are some... I also had the opportunity when I spoke to someone there who was actually, I would say the word was relieved that he was safe from the terrible war that is happening in his own country, despite the inadequate living conditions. I'm in no way defending the present state of the centre in Kofinou. But what I am saying is that the last at least 3 weeks with the Minister of Interior, there have been several meetings, and it's going to go through the Committee of Ministers so that there is a whole change and shift in the way that this centre is being managed. Those who had the tender for a lot of the services, food, that has been stopped, interrupted. As I think of beginning of April, they've pulled back that tender because it was inadequate. So
Well, the food was appalling, apparently.
Apparently they've changed 2 tenders. The food was not only the quality, not so much the quality as the quantity that I have heard was not sufficient.
I've heard that the quality was awful and a lot of them really just didn't want to eat it.
But what I think should be the aim is for people to cook on their own. I think that these people
Yes, we should say they come from different countries where there are different cuisines.
Exactly. They come from different countries, they come from different cuisines. They should be able to cook on their own. I will also say that the common areas of cooking, which I saw in June, a lot of them had been destroyed by a lack of care from the people themselves. And I think we also need to look at this. You need to educate people how to use facilities which they may never have had in their countries.
Yes, but again, we're back to that cleaning contract.
Yes.
There are people who are paid to clean,
Yes.
and it's patently obvious from the photos that keep coming out that they're still getting paid, but they're not doing the cleaning.
Yes, I think that we need to be very closely monitoring this for the next 2 or 3 months.
How the money is spent.
How the money is spent, and also that... some of the basic issues which I know you highlighted, for example, there was a problem with the plumbing, there wasn't any hot water. That's been resolved. We checked it. For me, this is not adequate. I'm not happy that there is hot water. When I went the other day, I saw that finally, at last, there are 2 play areas for children which have just been set up. New play areas for children.
Away from the sewage.
Away from the sewage, and with new outdoor toys for them. Finally, after a lot of effort, they've actually planted a number of sycamore trees, which are very young, but they will blossom and it will give some shade and will change the whole concept of the centre.
One wonders why they're not encouraged perhaps to have a little vegetable garden, that they could grow their own fresh veg.
They could, you see, but I think that the way that this reception centre was expanded is not the way that it has encouraged this. I did see that they have some potted plants that they're growing their own things. We need to relook at the whole thing, and I think that there is this effort now starting. It's not adequate that we have left it for so long. I believe that Cyprus should have a reception centre that should be something that we should be proud of. This was definitely not something that we should be proud of, but there is a huge effort happening at the moment within the Ministry of Interior, and the General Secretary of the Ministry was there himself for the first time when we went, to inform us of all the steps being taken so that within the next few weeks there are going to be major changes.
Well, that's great news, but let's look a little bit further ahead, if we may. And you keep talking about integration. Kofinou's in the middle of the sticks. It's really difficult for any of them, for example, to get to Nicosia, because I think they have to get a bus down to Larnaca, wait a couple of hours.
They have to get a bus, but if their papers are processed quickly, Kofinou should only be a stopover for a few months. Yes, but it's not.
That's the problem, as you said.
Yes, well, that needs to be looked at as well. I mean, most of the reception centres I saw abroad are not in the middle of a big city. But the whole point is that you have to make sure that the paperwork is processed a lot quicker and that people are able to move in and out a lot faster. So this is what we need to look at.
And what about the opportunities for some basic work? Because the other thing, psychologically, as I'm sure you know, you're a medical person, if you're sat in a place with nothing to do, day in and day out, it is soul-destroying. It doesn't induce the feeling of wanting to contribute. All the refugees and asylum seekers I've spoken to say, we would like to show how grateful we are to Cyprus that we're here. We want to give something back, but we don't seem to give them the opportunity to do that. Maybe unpaid, but it would at least keep their minds busy.
Yes, I think that is another issue that I think that some of them do want to work and some do not. We need to also be careful here that it's a number of people. They come from different backgrounds. They come from different situations. They not all want the same things, and I think we need to be careful how we deal with them.
Perhaps a language course to start, something
they
like that?
They do have Greek courses. They do have language courses. Some of the programs being run there are helping, but I believe that the decision to have someone permanently situated there,
taking the decisions
and having it more autonomous to everything else is going to make the significant difference. And they have found the person. We were given his name, I can't remember at the moment, and he will be stationed there permanently as of very, very shortly. This will, I think, change a great deal of what is happening, because you cannot not have someone who feels that they are in charge. There needs to be someone in charge, but also to have the autonomy that something breaks down, I have a team there permanently that's going to fix it now and not send a letter to a ministry.
That's good news indeed for all of us.
We'll say if it's good news when we go back in June, if it's significantly improved. Then I will be able to say it's good news. We are on a right track, but that's as far as I will go at the moment.
All right, well, I suppose it's just as well to be a little cautious, but we've been talking to MP Stella Kyriakidis about the situation at the Kofinou Reception Centre, and from what she said, it does look as if all those problems are going to be addressed, and most importantly, very, very soon. The issue of golden visas, or as it's otherwise known, the Citizenship for Investment scheme, is coming under the watchful eye of the European Union. What is it, and has it benefited Cyprus, or is it time to ditch it? We're joined on the programme this week by a Professor of Economics at the University of Cyprus, Sofronis Kleridis. For those who aren't aware, Sofronis, of the whole scheme, how it started and why it started, can we go right back to the beginning?
Sure. So there was some form of a scheme like this before the crisis. It was much less ambitious. It had different requirements, and it was mostly for visas for permanent residency rather than citizenship. Basically, what happened was that after the crisis, the government thought that it needed to find a way to boost the economy, and this was one idea that they came up with. So the first scheme of this generation, let's call it, because the scheme has changed at least twice since 2004 when it was first introduced. It was first introduced then after the crisis in 2014. The basic idea is that people who make certain types of investments in Cyprus and satisfy some other conditions can get citizenship, a Cyprus passport.
So they become members of the European Union by default because Cyprus is a European Union member, and the criteria, if I'm correct, involved very much a boost for the real estate sector. They had to buy a house or a property worth a certain amount of money.
Yes, one of the biggest components is real estate. They have to buy a house. In the current version of the program, the real estate is the main component. They have to buy a 2 million euro property. In the different incarnations of the program, it was a little bit different. I don't even remember all the details now. But the real estate component was always important. It's not the only investment that can get you a passport, but it's the easiest route, basically, and it's also the easiest to satisfy from the side of the Cypriot, businessmen, because it's easy to you build towers with luxury apartments, and then you sell them to these people who want to get citizenship.
And we should say that, am I right in thinking the vast majority of people who've taken advantage of this scheme are either Chinese or Russian? They're very wealthy businessmen.
They must be very wealthy to be willing to spend, 2.5 million to get a citizenship. We don't really have any statistics, but as from what we know, is most of them are Russian, Chinese, and also Arab. From what we hear, again, we don't have statistics.
Well, and that's one of the problems, isn't it? I think that's why the EU is perhaps taking a closer look at this scheme. It's not that Cyprus is the only EU country to do it, but there are suggestions that we haven't kept a good eye on where the money that's being brought into Cyprus for these schemes is coming from.
There are several issues. So several other countries have citizenship by investment schemes. Some of them are a bit similar, some of them are quite different. They differ in how much you have to invest, they differ in what happens to what you invest, in what kind of investments count, how long it takes to get a passport, do you get a passport or a permanent residence. There's a lot of variation. Cyprus is one of the more expensive ones in the sense that you need to put down a lot of money, make a big investment, but it has the benefit of you get the passport very quickly. So for people who are kind of in a rush, Cyprus is it's a bit on the expensive side, but you get your citizenship quite quickly.
But what about this problem with scrutiny? Because that is what's going to come back and bite us, I suspect.
That's what a lot of people are afraid of. In principle, the law stipulates that I think the Ministry of the Interior is basically in charge of making the necessary checks to make sure that the money comes from legitimate sources, and there are no people have a clean criminal record and so forth. How well is this done? We don't know. This is Cyprus, so you have to be a little worried. And also, even if it's done in good faith and it's done as well as it can be done, still, when you give 1,500 or 2,000 passports, you're going to make a few mistakes, even in the best circumstances. So we might end up, finding out that we gave passports to people who really we shouldn't have.
Right. What about the role of MOCA, the money laundering scrutinizer here? Are they not involved in this?
I'm not aware, actually. I would hope so. I would hope they would be part of this system that actually checks, does the vetting for these people, but I don't really know the details.
Right, let's come on to the impact that this scheme has had on the economy in Cyprus. You were quoted in the Cyprus Mail this last week as saying that it's created an imbalance, if you like, particularly in the type of buildings that are now being constructed. And certainly anybody who drives through Limassol is seeing the skyline change so fast it's quite scary.
Yes, so, depending on how you look at it, viewed from one perspective, you can say that this program has been extremely successful. If your goal was to attract investment, especially if your goal was to attract real estate investment, this is a huge success. Tons of real estate investment, we can all see it, and it has definitely contributed to the rebounding of the economy from the crisis.
But hasn't it skewed the market? What about local house buyers?
Well, I was getting to that. I was going to give you the positives first, and then I'm going to go over to the negatives. So it's worth mentioning the positives because it gave a boost to the real estate sector. It created a lot of economic activity. All this construction means activity, means jobs, and so forth. So there is a positive effect there. The problem...
Hang on, before you go on to
yes.
the problems, another positive effect, it would seem, is for certain select big companies here, and particularly legal companies, who seem to have jumped in on this and become, if you like, brokers for these people, taking a cut. Some of them connected, it would seem, to some of our politicians.
That sounds very plausible. I was actually going to put that in the negative side of the balance sheet. There is one more positive benefit, possible positive benefit that is much harder to know, though, which is that this scheme has helped stabilize and now push up the prices of real estate, which is good for the banks. So it helps the banks with their balance sheets. And probably, you would hope it has helped some developers who were in deep trouble to be able to recover and hopefully pay off some of their loans. So
there are suggestions that that was part and parcel of the whole idea in the first place.
And that would be a sensible reason why to do this thing. I mean, if that didn't happen, that would be it would make you wonder why we're doing this, right? I mean, so that would be a benefit of this. I don't have the way of knowing how much, but hopefully it helped in that sense. Now, on the negative side, well, we all know that from the economic perspective, investment is good, but not all investments are the same. So investment in real estate is not what I would call sort of productive investment, because, okay, you're building a house for somebody, so there is some benefit from that in the short run when you're during the construction phase, and a little bit maybe when the person moves in and then they're going to use other services, they're going to go to restaurants and so forth. So there is some benefit, but the long run benefit is pretty limited.
Because a lot of these people are not living here anyway.
And also that's an additional downside, is that if the people are not living here, then the long run benefit is very small. It's next to nothing. And I'm sort of want to compare that with a different kind of investment where somebody comes here and sets up a factory, or factories are old fashioned now, maybe a research center, or brings their company and sets up their regional headquarters. That means a lot of people come and live here. It creates jobs. It creates a lot of economic activity for the long run. Okay, so that's the kind of investment that I think we should be trying to attract. Not real estate investment. A little bit of that is fine, but not as much.
But we've done a lot of it in the last few years.
Yes,
so should we call a halt to it now?
And it distorts. You mentioned this earlier, I think, and I promised I was going to get to it. It raises prices. It raises the price of land and of houses and apartments, and making it very difficult for locals to afford housing in Cyprus. So that's a problem for the future. It also distorts all investment, all activities. Now is targeting this very, very high end of the market, and there's not so much interest in addressing, let's say, housing needs at the lower end of the market, because there's not so much profit to be made there.
So we've got a skewed market. We've had bubbles before in other things. Do you expect it to burst at some point? Or it doesn't seem as if at the moment there's any move afoot to call a halt.
Well, I mean, this cannot go on forever, because there's only so much beachfront that you can build on. So hopefully we will be able to to avoid the bursting of this. We should be proactive and phase it down gradually, so that we don't end up with a bunch of empty or half-constructed towers on the Limassol coast. That would not be a good sight.
And that brings us to the environment, because it does seem that a lot of the developments, I mean, if you go up to the Lachi area on the west coast, that's changed completely. Again, not high-rise, but luxury villas and so on. And then you've got all these high-rises in Limassol and a fair amount of construction going on in Nicosia as well. We haven't, I think, thought through, do you think, the environmental impact of all this and the infrastructure that's got to serve it, particularly things like water, sewage and so on?
These are not things that I know I'm an expert on, but my guess is that no, we haven't really thought through. I think the crisis kind of served to set aside whatever rules we had or whatever processes, and then we decided it kind of reminds me a little bit of the late 70s. After the invasion, we needed to build the hotels in Limassol very fast, because we lost all the hotels in Famagusta, so that's what we did. And we're basically doing the same thing now, except instead of building hotels, we're building these towers. And the environmental impact is likely to be quite significant. And like I said, I'm not an expert, but it's something that's going to come back to haunt us probably.
But on the economy, you reckon that it's time to take another very close look at whether there are better models?
Absolutely. I think, I'm not against the citizenship by investment program as such. And I've been saying this in public for almost a year and a half or more than that. But like I said before, there's different kind of investments. I think we are way past the point of where we should have stopped with real estate investment. I think we should phase it down. You cannot do it too fast because you don't want to create another crisis, but we should really start phasing it down, shutting down the real estate investment channel. And then we can leave a scheme, but for other types of investments that do not produce so many distortions and have more benefits for the economy for the long run.
And that is Professor of Economics at the University of Cyprus, Sophronis Kleridis. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.